Welcome to our Behdini Beginners course. This is our last class, class number 21, and we're going to work on lesson 10. I'm going to just walk you through the grammar, and then you'll be on your own to work with your language helper after that. You can always email me questions. Happy to try to help you with that. Hope these sessions have been helpful for you. Glad you've been able to learn Kurdish with me. All right, so we're going to look at lesson 10. And in this lesson, we introduce present tense, such as wake up, and present continuous, such as am waking up, or future, such as will wake up. Then also the negative of that, I don't or won't, or I'm not waking up. That's all one mode in Kurdish. And then we have modals such as I want to wake up, and the negative of that, I don't want to wake up. So you see here several examples using everyday routines as the topic. Each letter has several examples, and you can study these, you can compare them. In the B section, it gives you the grammatical terms for these things: simple present, present progressive, simple future, negated present and future, subjunctive I with the modals, and negated subjunctive I. So there are several of these that you can go through. On page 225, this talks about suggestions, and a lot of these are going to use subjunctive I, which is obvious from the B, which is on the verb stem. In part 3, you can do that with your audio recordings. Section B has more vocabulary. You can work on this with your language helper. Section C, you can do that with your language helper or a friend. Use the audio recordings. And just one thing to note about O, U, and U, these sounds are inconsistent in Kurdish. So you really need to listen to your Kurdish friends to know how best to pronounce them. So they will differ from speaker to speaker. We have very few O sounds, O-da, O-da. Usually in the Behdini area, it's all sort of smushed to oo. Every now and then, like nose, da, that's an O sound. Some people say rouge, some people say rouge. Some people say chirok, some people say chiruk. So it's a dialectical thing. So listen to your language helper and you'll find out how best to do that pronunciation. Section D, you have all the vocabulary. Let's look at the modal verbs in section D. Down here at the bottom, modal verbs and adjectives. So this first one, ilah, is Arabic, and you've probably heard your friends say this when they're talking to someone and they're being very dramatic and very emphatic about something. Ilah, you have to do something, okay? So that's, even though it's Arabic, it's used commonly in our part of the world. Then probably the most common, other than that, is lazima. However, that is also Arabic, and so they don't write it, so they write peytiviya or peytivinaket. And sometimes they do peywist when they write things. And you'll hear people say it too. It's getting more common because the students, the school kids are learning it as part of their reading in their school books. Mohim, majbur, these are not as common. For majbur, you have to conjugate the bun biba or bin biba verb. So if I is the subject, the intended subject of your modal verb, then you're going to say majburim, I must do something. But if you're talking to somebody else, you'd say majburi. Or if you're talking about someone, majbura, like he must do this. Otherwise, none of these use anything except or ya. Nakat, which is when it's negated, it uses nakat as that negation form. And then shion b'shay, I can, you can. Vion b've, I want or need to do something. These are your most common modal verbs and adjectives. Now in these present tenses, it doesn't matter, except for a few irregular ones, it doesn't matter if it's transitive or intransitive. So that was very important in lesson 8 and lesson 9 when we were conjugating past tense verbs and passive. But this, passive in the past tense, but this present tense, present continuous, it doesn't matter for the most part if the verb is transitive or intransitive. Section E, you can do with your language helper or the audio recordings. So we're going to look at the grammar on page 233. And I'm looking at the Zacholi version here. So in part 1, the first thing we're going to do is learn about imperatives, the imperative stem, and the present stem. Back in lesson 1, we learned that Kurdish verbs have 2 parts, an infinitive and an imperative. The imperative is listed second in the dictionary. So if your verb is to turn around or to make a U-turn, zivarin bezivara, bezivara is the imperative. And that's what we're going to be working with in this lesson. The present stem and the imperative stem are formed from the imperative. The imperative stem is represented by a blank box. The present stem in my grammar charts is represented by a gray box. To form the imperative stem of a verb, the blank box, you drop the ending from the imperative. If it ends with anything else, you don't drop it. And then note that Dahuki speakers don't drop the from bika, bida, or bigreda. Zacholis do. To form the present stem, the gray box, you drop the bi or the b from the imperative stem. So you drop the bi or the b, and you drop the from the imperative. If it begins with anything other than bi or b, you don't drop it. Okay? So imperative for zivarin bezivara. So the imperative is bezivara. The imperative stem simply gets rid of the ending. And then this is your imperative stem. Present stem gets rid of the and it gets rid of the bi. So your present stem is zivid. Now, just a little disclaimer here. I've never heard of any grammar expert to call it an imperative stem. That's my own making. That's my own use of the English language to describe what's going on. So if you look in other grammar books, you probably won't find that term. Subjunctive I verbs, such as when you use a modal adjective, like I want to go, or something like that. So subjunctive I verbs are formed from the imperative stem. Verbs in the present tense, like I go, I am going, the present continuous, and the future tense, like I will go, these are formed from the present stem, like zipid. So you need to know both. So in this section down here below, again, I'm looking at the Zochali version. You're going to identify the imperative, which is easy to do. It's simply the second listing of the verb, the thing that comes after the comma. So find the comma, and then anything after that is the imperative. For example, in number 5, pakij kudin pakij bika, find your comma, and then everything after that comma. Everything after that is the imperative. And then note in number 2, shian bishay. Bishay does not end in an it ends in an e with a hat, bishay. So you don't drop it. You don't drop it if it's not an Surely there's another one here that's like that. Here's one. You don't drop that Here's one. Well, there you go. You have at least one example. Wash is another. Bishu. Wash. Let's see it right off. Okay, so after you identify what your imperative is, you write that here in this column. Go through and do that first. Then come back. After you have your imperative, then you can form your imperative stem by dropping the ending from your imperative. That leaves you with your imperative stem. Do that for all of them. Then come back. And then you can work on your present stem, which is formed by taking the imperative stem and dropping the bi or the b at the front. And that becomes your present stem. And it's not anything to pronounce. It's just a stem. It's not a word all by itself. It's just a stem. And from that stem, we're going to plug it into our verb formulas, which includes sometimes something on the front and sometimes something on the back. So look at that. What does that look like? So on page 235, we're going to talk about verb endings. All non-past tense verbs have the same verb endings, which are identical to past tense verb endings, plus the third person singular endings. So if you compare your past tense verb endings, which is this one here on the left, here's your past tense verb chart. So here's your past stem, and then your verb endings. See these? This is what we're comparing. These compared with non-past tense verb endings are exactly the same, except that where there is a nothing ending, now we have an ending. And this differs from zacho to hook. Some hookies will say eat instead of it. So that's where you need to listen to your language helper, find out how that language helper speaks, and then you imitate that person. So the difference is that in the past tense, you use the past stem, which is formed from the infinitive. And in the non-past tense, you use either the imperative stem or the present stem, and these are formed from the imperative, not from the infinitive. So you use the charts above, read the English translation, and add the correct verb ending to the sentences. I've already given you the stem. So I wake up. This is present tense. So we're going to use this chart. And we're going to use one of these endings here. And since it's I, it's going to agree with your subject. So it's either or And because the verb stem ends in a b, we're going to choose so that we have a vowel. Okay, so go through, do all of those, check them in your appendix. Make sure you're doing those correctly. And just note that as long as in all of these I change the subject frequently, I pretty much do it in the order of my chart. And I do that so you can practice using different subjects with different verb endings. So what's the subject? I wake up at 7 o'clock. Well, at 7 o'clock is at haft. So that's not my subject. I is the subject. So here's my subject, us. And this us determines what my verb ending will be. So I go up to my chart. I find my us. Here's my us. So I have to stay in line. And then I go over and I grab one of these verb endings. Okay, let's look at A2. Are you waking up? Well, that's how we do questions in English. But in Kurdish, we don't have a verb like are at the beginning. We just jump in with our subject. So do is our subject. And that is going to determine what our verb ending is. So you go up to your verb ending, you find your chart, you find do, and then you jump over here and you find that you have only two options, E or E. So E is your answer there. In A3, what's our subject? She will wake up at 7 o'clock. Okay, so at half, that's our at 7 o'clock. So here's our she, ow. And this time is future tense, which you'll notice we have this day. That's not really relevant to what we're doing right now. I'm just pointing it out to you. Okay, so our subject is ow, and that subject determines what our verb ending will be. The way you know it's future tense is from this day. Right there. That tells me it's future tense. Now the fourth example here in section A is we want to wake up at 7 o'clock. That is it called, in Kurdish, this is called a subjunctive I sentence, where we could actually say we wake up at 7 o'clock, because that's the way it is in Kurdish. So we want is the first verb sentence. Ma debate. This is ergative sentence construction. In the present tense, this verb want uses ergative sentence construction, where the verb ending agrees with the object, which is we want something. And that something is like he, she, or it. So it takes that t ending, regardless of what the subject is. It's just an irregular verb thing that you have learned from the past, from past lessons, I should say. Okay, so motivate. That's the first part of your subjunctive sentence. The second part of the subjunctive sentence is saat haft hishiar b something. Okay, so in this case, we is our subject. Saat haft is at 7 o'clock. And then hishiar b is our verb. Wake up. So because we is the subject, that's going to determine what my verb ending is. So here's my subject, and that determines what my verb ending is. Now you say, but I thought ma was my subject. Well, it is. Ma dvet. Now that is an independent clause. We want. In Kurdish, it's independent. And then we wake up at 7 o'clock is the next part. We wake up at 7 o'clock. So the first part is ergative. This part is ergative. But the second part is not ergative. It's regular sentence construction. And the two don't mix with each other. They do make one sentence together, but the verb endings go with their respective subjects. Now, if we're going to negate that, then in English, we would say, so we want to wake up at 7 o'clock. We could say they, to change our subject, they don't wake up. That's present tense. Or they won't wake up. That's future tense. Or they are not waking up. That's the progressive tense. And all of these are exactly the same in Kurdish. There's your subject, ow. Hishiar na, there's your negator. And then because of your ow subject, they, that determines what your verb ending is. And you have to know, is it present, future, or progressive tense? You have to know that from the context. All right, so you could go on all of these different verbs that I've given you as examples. Now let's study in depth simple present tense. Look at page 237. Again, I'm looking at the Zaho dialect. To make this simple present tense, you have to add the DI continuous marker before the present stem. This DI marker is pronounced d, id, it, or t, depending on the verb, depending on the speaker. And then after you do that, you add the verb ending. Okay, so here's our chart, same as what we've worked with before, same verb endings, that is all exactly the same. It's just that now we have this d in front of our present stem. Okay, so let's review. If our imperative is bezivra, we're going to form the present stem by getting rid of the bi at the front and getting rid of the at the end. So we end up with zivr. And then for the present simple present tense, we're going to add di in front of the present stem. And then you have to add your verb ending. Okay, so for this exercise, you use this chart and the footnotes below. You put the correct verb here and make sure you put the correct ending on. Okay, let's do this first one together. So after that, I get up from sleep. All right, so the subject of my sentence is I. Let's find that. Here it is, us. From sleep is this little prepositional phrase, schau. Okay, so our focus is on get up. So here's our get up. That's our verb. Here's our verb, Robin, Roba. So Roba is our imperative. So we're going to work with that. Roba does not begin with a bi, so we don't drop anything from the beginning of it, but it does end in an a. So we get rid of that a. Get rid of that a. So now we've put our formula together. So we have us as our subject. So then we write di in front of the present stem. So here goes our di. And our present stem we determined to be Rob. So you put Rob. And then you're looking for the ending. So you either do I am or you do m. But because it ends in a b, we're looking for the one with a verb. So we're looking for the first one. And there you have it. Pashi az shcha. Haha. But this one happens to be compound. So your di is going to go right here. Let me type it for you. So, Roba, okay? Your present stem is Rob. And you form that dropping the Okay, so here's our present stem. Okay, so the formula is you add di and then your stem, and then your verb ending. But with this verb, this happens to be compound, and I just know that because I've heard it 1,000 times. So you take off that di and you put it right before the base verb, which is the b, radbum. Ashhal radbum. All right, nothing like starting with one that's got a compound verb to it. Let's look at the next one. Okay, number 2. Do you read the Bible every day? All right, what a question. Sometimes people ask you that. So what's our subject? You, singular, is the subject. Okay, so let's find it. Here we go. Do. And what's our verb? Our verb is read. Okay, so here's our verb for read. Honden beginnen. But we're only going to work with the imperative. So beginnen. And we're going to get rid of the bi. And we're going to get rid of the So we end up with queen. Queen. This is our present stem. Okay. So we take 2, we put the di, then we add the queen, and then we add the verb ending, which the only verb ending available is I with a hat. 2. Harosh tu pertukapirus de quini. Do you read? And in this case, it's pronounced d. To dchwini, dchwini, dchwini. It's very lightly spoken, d, to dchwini, but it's there. All right, let's see about another one. All right, the next one. He drinks coffee. All right, so he is our subject, and ao is he. Now we have this verb that has 3 words. How do I know which is my imperative? So look at the footnote, and the footnote says use the first imperative. Okay, so what's the first imperative? This is the infinitive, so we don't want that. So here's imperative number 1, and here's imperative number 2. So we don't want that. So we're going to work with that first imperative. Vahwa. All right, let's go to our blackboard here. Vahwa. Now it doesn't begin with the bi, so we can't take that off, but it does end with an so we'll get rid of that. So vah is our stem, present stem. Subject is ao, he drinks coffee. Ao. And I'll get to the DI in a second. So ow is our subject. He drinks coffee. So here's our ow. So it's either going to be it or t. All right. So because it ends with a w, we're going to put it. Now, where does our DI go? Normally, it would go right there, but this is compound, and so it goes right there instead. Au, va, de, chut. But it's not pronounced that way. It's pronounced au, va, t, chut. Vatchut. Au, vatchut. This is where the DI takes on a different pronunciation. So it is written DI. Okay? Au, vatchut. Where you have to listen to your language helper, your friends, the audio recordings. All right, let's see, is anything else tricky here? In number 5, again, you have to use the first imperative. So let's look at number 6. After that, they wash their head, or they take a shower is what it really means. Okay, so what's our subject? They. Ow. And then we're looking for the imperative. So the imperative is sere ho bishu. So we're just going to ignore sere ho. Okay, we're going to work with bishu here. So we're going to get rid of the bi, but there is no at the end of this verb. So we don't get rid of anything with So shu is the base part of our present stem. And sereho just goes along for the ride. We don't have to change that at all. So sereho shu is our present stem. Now, where am I going to put my DI? Okay, sereho, my DI is going to go right there. DI, and then my verb ending, they. So here's they. So it's either in or n, but because dishu ends in an O, I'm going to go for just the n. I don't want any extra vowels. So, n. There I go. Au sereho dishun. I think the rest of these are pretty understandable. Okay, now let's look on page 238 and look at present progressive tense. This is almost identical to simple present tense, which we just learned. Okay, so to make the simple present tense, you add a to the subject and 8 to the plural subject of sentences, but not to questions. And then you add the de continuous marker before the present stem and the verb ending. Now, this is different in Tehuki. Let's go look at Tehuki. In Tehuki, you add a for masculine subjects or a for feminine subjects, and then 8 for plural subjects. Okay, so this is a little difference between Tehuki and Zacholi. This is Zacholi here. All right, so what does that look like? Here, you have to put the subject in. I am getting up from sleep. So you would write in as. Sorry. You have to write in your subject. So as. Then your verb. Okay. So let's see what that's going to look like. My verb is rabun raba. Okay, I'm looking at the Tehuki right now. Rabin raba for Zacho. Rabun raba. Okay. So first, let's look at our subject, as. Well, I happen to be feminine. I'm female. So I have to add za. So that has to be added first. And that goes right after the subject. Okay. And then ba is my imperative. So I get rid of the E. Rab is my present stem. But again, the DI that would normally go in front is going to go right there. And I add my verb ending. Aza shchal radbim. But if you're a man, you're not going to say aza. Or if you're in Zacho, you're not going to say aza. You're going to say azeh. So the only difference between present continuous, I am getting up from sleep, and present simple present, I get up from sleep. The only difference at the end of your subject. Everything else is the same. Okay, that was simple. Okay, and then future tense, part 6, 39. This is also simple. The only difference between simple present and simple future is the day future marker immediately after the subject. So it would be as day, and you don't have this continuous marker. As day shchal rabim. So there's no DI connected to the present stem. Day is the future marker. And then if you want to negate any of those that we just learned, then you remove the DI or the day marker, and you remove anything that you put on the subject for progressive. And you add the na negator before the present stem. So there's your non-negator that goes right before the present stem. And everything else is the same. So instead of as de schouwrabem, or instead of as schouwradebem, present tense, or za schouwradebem, progressive. All of these can be simply negated with going to take the present and modify it. So here's my present. I'm going to modify it. I'm going to get rid of that di. Boop. And instead, I'm going to put na in the place of the di. And that means won't. Ashkau-ra-nabam. And that is how you do negated. You simply replace the di with the na, or the de with the na. All right, and then on page 241, we get to subjunctive I. A subjunctive I sentence has two verb phrases. The first phrase is a modal verb or adjective, like I want to or I should. The second phrase is subjunctive, and you add the appropriate verb ending to the imperative stem, which has the bi on it still. Otherwise, the verb endings are all the same. There is nothing added here in the front like de or de. That is not there, okay? So lazima as how I should get up. Okay, what's that going to look like? So raba is our imperative, and rab is my stem. As so what's my sentence? Lazima means it is necessary. That's the modal part of the sentence. And then ashkau rab, and then my verb ending, m. Agrees with my us. That one didn't have a bi on it. Let's use one that has a bi on it. Behdini. So you should read. Okay. Dvet. You should. Dvet. It. You should. Then you is my subject. To. Then my verb is behdini. Queen is my imperative stem. Between. To between, and then you have to add your verb ending that agrees with your to. Okay, so then my verb ending is E. That means you should read. It's in quotation marks because it literally means I want you to read, or you want to read, or they want you to read. But dvit, it's just the short form. All right, so I'm going to let you do all of those with your chart and check your answers in the answer key. If you're going to negate your subject 1, then you negate, oops, you negate the modal verb or adjective phrase. So then you would say, instead of dvit, you should read, then we're going to say navit, you should not read. You negate the modal adjective or modal verb. You don't negate the subjunctive part. Very rarely you would do that. Now you can also use words like pat ad and abat. And if you use words like that, then you negate the subjunctive 1 phrase the same way you would negate present and future tense verbs. Ila is also negated with na. For example, in number 4, ila, nani, and then you're going to say na instead of na, I believe. All right, let's see what's next. And then you have a review and some translation, and you can go from there. Okay, so we are going to wrap this up. Here we go. Thank you for studying with me. If you have any questions, be sure to email me, WhatsApp me. I'm happy to try to help you. This will take lots of study on your part, but you can do this. So, have a great day. Enjoy your studies. Enjoy your Kurdish learning. Bye for now.